All right, guys, welcome back to, we might call this one, Martin, a mini episode of the
Yeah,
League Express podcast. My
yeah.
name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. How you going, Martin?
I'm absolutely fine, Jake. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fortunately the weather's cooled off a bit in England at the moment, and it's not we're not having such a heat wave as we were 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that suits me, mate. And I dare say it's pretty warm where you are on the Sunshine Coast.
Mate, it's very pleasant weather over here at the moment. I think
Yeah,
it's about 20 degrees, 19 degrees at the moment.
I
But I'm
wouldn't want it to
surprised
go
you.
much hotter.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've still got my long sleeves on, but I'm surprised you're so keen for it to go cold again, Martin. You're not enjoying the heat over there, mate.
I'm not a hot weather guy. No, I'm not a hot weather guy.
Yeah,
I don't. I don't like. I don't like it going much above 25. Let's say
yeah,
that's hot enough for me, mate. That's
no,
why
that's fair
I'd
enough.
struggle to live in Australia.
Yeah, just come over in the winter, mate. You'll be fine.
That's
Um,
right. Yeah.
but mate, basically, we've decided to come on today to just do a bit of a short chat about all the news that's broken over the last 24 hours or so. We do have a pretty special guest coming on a little bit later in the week. I think Thursday morning we're going to line up Matthew Ellis to come on.
The owner of
Um,
Wakefield. Yeah.
that's right, which will be great to hear his perspective on, I guess that turning that club around, and they're doing great at the moment, aren't they, Wakefield? I think they're sitting in sixth place in the ladder,
They are.
and packing out that stadium every week they play.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I was a hospitality guest at the game against Leeds last Thursday, and one of the things they ask you to do before the game is guess the crowd. And I just said, "Well, what's the capacity? What's the crowd capacity?" And somebody said 9,250. So I said, "Well, that's my guess then."
Yeah, yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
wrote down. It actually turned out at 9,252. Two people must have snuck in.
Climb
Maybe
the
with
fence, maybe.
who knows, exceeded the capacity. Who
Yeah.
knows? But
Uh,
no, it was great. I didn't get the trouble is I didn't win the prize because I didn't get the score line right or the first try scorer.
but I guess we'll get into some of the news in a sec, mate. But just talk me through, what was the atmosphere like? It was a cracker of a game.
It was fantastic. And actually, while we're talking about Matt Ellis, Matthew has owned Wakefield for less than 2 years now. He's just coming up for a 2 year anniversary, I think. And I've never known a club owner make such a immediate, strong impact with the fans. Of all the club owners, I think Matthew probably has the best relationship with the supporters of his club, particularly particularly with doing his salute after the game. Fist pumping
Yeah,
when Trinity win, or when there's and all the crowd do it in response. It's one of those things that it's a great sort of great sight to see the fans responding in that way.
yeah.
And I've been going to Wakefield Trinity for so many years, and that night on Thursday night, when Mason Leno kicked the field goal that won the game for Wakefield, it's the best atmosphere I can remember at Bellevue. I can't easily remember a better atmosphere than it was on Thursday night, because the ground was absolutely packed, and obviously the majority were Wakefield fans, although there were a lot of Leeds fans there as well who added to the atmosphere. But it was terrific, and what was one of the things why it was so great, because the game told a great story, because it was 8-all, and then Leeds took the lead 14-8 with a try that made it look as though they were going to win the game because it was fairly late on. But then Wakefield responded with a try 5 minutes later through Matty Staunton to make it 14-all. And the clock was obviously winding down. We were in the last 2 or 3 minutes. And Brodie Croft tried to kick a field goal. It looked to me as though it was going over. So it was, every Wakefield fan sort of watched that ball and thought it was going to score the 1 point. And it didn't. It just went wide. And then we got to the last 10 seconds and Mason Leno did it with, what looked like a pretty unpromising drop goal attempt, to be honest. I didn't think it was going to get there, but it did. And the Wakefield fans absolutely exploded. And it was a great night. And the great thing about Matt Ellis, not only, I was there in hospitality in the New East stand, the Neil Fox stand, as it's now rightfully called at Bellevue. And Matt's great, because before the game, he comes round and speaks to every table, introduces himself, and of course the vast majority of people in there know him already. So it's a bit like saying hello to a good friend, really. And he's just transformed the club, and that's just all we need is a Matthew Ellis at every single club in the game, and it'd be an awful lot stronger.
Yeah, it looks like he's done a really good job of making it like a family-friendly environment there,
no doubt
mate.
about it.
But yeah, we can't wait to hear it all from him in a couple of days' time, mate. So for our listeners, we encourage them to stay tuned for that one. Thursday afternoon, it should go live on YouTube and Spotify. But mate, it's been a busy, 48, 24 hours. The latest news, looks like the clubs have come together and they've voted in favour of a 14-team Super League in 2026. What are the details on this one, Martyn, and did the news surprise you?
No, after speaking to quite a few club owners over the weekend, it didn't surprise me, really. I thought they would go for it. And of course, it's the decision of the Super League clubs. How many clubs are in Super League? So 9 clubs voted in favour. Only the 2 Hull clubs voted against. Hull KR because they thought it was too early. They thought it should have been in 2027. Hull FC because they believe in a 10-team Super League competition. They don't want to dilute the quality of the Super League competition. And Wigan abstained from the vote, which is surprising. I'd have thought that they would have had a view on either for or against, but they decided that abstention was the right course of action in their case. But nonetheless, it was clearly carried very substantially with 9 votes in favour. So we're now going to get to the end of the season. The 12 clubs in Super League, the top 12 clubs, will be decided by the grading system. But then there will be an application process where clubs that are not in the top 12 will be able to apply to join Super League, and a committee or a panel headed by Lord Jonathan Kane will decide which 2 should be elevated into Super League. And if you remember, when Toronto Wolfpack dropped out of Super League in the COVID era of 2020, and we had to find a club to replace them in 2021, the same system was introduced, and that was when Lee came up into Super League. And you've got to say that Lee have been a very, very made a very positive contribution indeed to Super League. They've, if you can compare any club owner to Matt Ellis, it's obviously Derek, who's been absolutely amazing at Lee, and has completely transformed that club and got similar sorts of crowds to the crowds that Wakefield are getting. So, you've got to say that worked well in that case. Whether it'll work well for next year, I've got really strong reservations. Is it possible to prepare for a club to become a Super League club in just a matter of months? Well, I don't think so, really, Jake. I think I can understand why the clubs want to have 14 teams in the competition. They all hate the loop fixtures, and I do as well. So I think that's a perfectly valid argument. The trouble is, and of course, they all have this fear that Toulouse will replace Salford or even Huddersfield in Super League next year if we go via the grading system. And they're all pretty terrified of having a 12-team Super League with two French teams in it, with the potential impact on TV viewing figures and the lack of away fans travelling to games and so on. So they want to go to 14, but frankly, it's a short-term decision. I think it carries an awful lot of danger, and I wouldn't have gone that way. I agree actually with Hull KR that you had to bite the bullet and go with whatever you had next year, and then plan for 14 teams in 2027, which is incidentally the first year of a new TV broadcasting contract. On the other hand, one or two club owners have said to me that going with 14 next year will sort of, indicate to Sky or any other broadcaster, what a 14-team Super League will look like from 2027 onwards. So, but I'm not sure that I really buy that argument, if I'm really honest about it. And I hope that it works out well, obviously. I think we all hope it will. But I'm just not sure that the two teams that come up, following the process that Lord Kane is going to oversee, I'm just not sure they will be strong enough. What would you... I mean, you would never do this in Australia, would you?
No, mate. Well, I had my doubts when they sort of brought the Dolphins in, and they kind of proved everyone wrong, but I always thought 12 months was such a short time frame to organise a whole roster. And this is probably worse. Like, we've got, 6 months to put together a competitive roster. So, and the fact that they're bringing in two new teams as well, like... I know in the NRL we're doing a bit of a staged process with Perth Bears and PNG in consecutive years. So, I'm not sure, mate. I agree with you. I think 2027 was the more logical idea. And, would it hurt the game in terms of the broadcasting deal if they were to bring in one team at a time and then have a 15-team comp? A 13-team comp and then a 14-team comp?
Yeah, I think expanding with too many teams can dilute the quality. There's no doubt about it, and obviously we've had this change in the rules about the number of overseas players we can recruit quite recently, which has gone up to 10, which again I think is too many, if I'm really honest about it. But so that will make it slightly easier for any new club in Super League to recruit players of hopefully a reasonable standard. But nonetheless, I still think it's going to be an incredible struggle, and I'm not mad about the idea. I think Nigel Wood was, he's now the chairman of the RFL, and I think he was broadly neutral, probably slightly coming down on the side of having 14 next year, I would guess. But I think I suspect that he recognises how difficult this is going to be. So, and of course we've then got to ask, well, who will the clubs be? There's also another issue of what's going to happen to Salford, because if Salford, as some people expect, drop out of Super League after their financial problems that they've suffered this year, which is by no means guaranteed, by the way, because there's no guarantee that Salford will fall out of Super League according to the grading system. But let's assume that they do. That means 3 new clubs coming into Super League. So that will probably be Toulouse, perhaps York, perhaps Bradford, perhaps Widnes, perhaps London Broncos, perhaps Oldham. They're all going to be keen to put their case forward, I think, and it's going to be interesting to see, which clubs eventually do get the nod, and it's actually very, very difficult to make that prediction, really. But my suspicion is that it will be Bradford and York as well as Toulouse, and that Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it, that York signed Paul Vaughan from Warrington recently. You know, Paul Vaughan, a player you know pretty well, and that looked like a signing that was intended to give them a boost in Super League next year.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I was kind of surprised when I saw that news come through. I thought, interesting. But, we know from our discussions with Clint Goodchild, he's always had aspirations of playing Super League. But yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? Given that we've had Gary Hetherington on last week, he's obviously involved with London. Personally, for me, looking at London, I feel like next year might be too soon for them, especially given that are they 10th in the championship standings at the moment?
Yes, they're certainly in the lower reaches. They're struggling to get away from the bottom four.
But in saying that, we talk about teams having such little time to prepare for their rise into Super League, but in previous years, teams have had to wait right up until the end of their seasons to see whether who gets promoted and relegated. So you could argue that teams are getting a little bit more time to prepare for promotion than in previous years. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't want to play favourites and say who I would like to see in Super League. I just hope that whoever goes up to Super League, they have good ownership and good people in positions that can get the best out of their clubs.
Well, the key thing is, the key thing ultimately is that they've got to be financially secure. We've seen what happens when a club isn't financially secure at Salford this year. So whichever clubs do get the nod, they've got to be able to demonstrate financial strength sufficient to cope with spending a year in Super League. Now, I mean, again, it's odd in a way, isn't it, to say we're going to go to 14, but without knowing who the 14 are going to be. You can't. We may well fight. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that when we have the Lord Kane panel assessments, that they might decide that none of the applicants are actually financially strong enough to cope with being in Super League, and that would be an interesting development, wouldn't it? That you might find that panel decides that none of them are good enough to be there, and I'd have thought that's a genuine possibility.
I mean, I know Nigel Wood won't care about this, but do you think it's a bad look for him in the RFL if Bradford are a team that is selected to come back into Super League?
Well, some people will I mean, there always rugby league does generate a lot of conspiracy theorists, and there might well be some people who say, "Oh, this was all planned to get Bradford into Super League." I don't think that's true, and I suspect Bradford may well be one of the clubs that get the nod. But if that's the case, I mean, Nigel isn't involved with them anymore for as long as he's a chairman of the RFL. The key thing for Bradford is what I've just said. Will they have enough financial strength to be able to compete in Super League against other clubs that are bankrolled by very wealthy people? That's going to be the issue.
That's it. And I guess the other concern I saw raised, well, not really a concern, but I think they've come out and said that there's going to be no changes in clubs' central distribution. Does this mean that there's going to be cost cutting elsewhere, do you think, to be able to?
Well, that is a hell of a challenge, isn't it? Because quite frankly, I don't see how you can square that. If the clubs are going to get the same distribution that they get now, which is, I think, about 1.25 million, 1.3 million, then if the new clubs are going to get something similar, where's that money going to come from? And if not, are those clubs going to get less money? And if they are, does that mean they're going to be less competitive? You would imagine so, wouldn't you? It's hard to see any alternative. So, and the thing we don't need is two clubs coming up to Super League who are going to be punch bags for every other club in Super League, as Salford have more or less been this year for rather too much of the season, I think. And I think that's potentially disastrous, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I know this would upset a lot of fans, but I'd love to see the RFL and anyone else do everything they can to make sure that the teams come up are competitive, and if there's any sort of incentives they could provide to players to go and sign with those clubs so that they are competitive. But
that's going to be vital. We can't afford, let's assuming it's Bradford and York, let's say. We can't afford them to be getting hammered every week, and if they are, their fans will soon fall away. It's a double-edged sword, is this, Jake? But obviously, Nigel Wood as the chairman, and Tony Sutton as the chief executive. Actually, Tony Sutton is the RFL chief executive, and he's the person who's there on a daily basis. He's got to now make this work, as has everybody involved with the game. Rodri Jones, who's the chief executive of RL Commercial, he's got to make it work as well. IMG, the RFL or the Rugby League consultants, they've got to play their part in making this work. People like me can express doubts, which I have done, and you have as well. But it's those are the people who have to make it work, as well as the clubs themselves. So, we do face an interesting period, and who knows how it's going to go. But it's a challenge for the game, I think.
Yeah, I think so too, mate. And this is one of those things they have to be all in on, because if we get 12 months down the track, 24 months down the track, and then they backpedal and go back to 12-team competition, we'll look like idiots.
They've changed so many times over the years. In fact, just as we're speaking, interestingly enough, I've just had an email come through from Gary Hetherington saying that London Broncos will definitely be applying to join Super League in 2026. Which is an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, they, as you say, you might think it's too soon, but clearly Gary wants to grab the opportunity while it's there. And knowing Gary, as I do, I'm pretty sure he will manage to put together a pretty impressive application. Gary doesn't do things by halves, so it will accelerate his thinking about the future of London Broncos, and if it can get them up, and of course it would be. I mean, I love having London Broncos in Super League. I loved it when they were there in 2019. I loved watching them in 2024. They were very unlucky to finish bottom, but they got demoted anyway because of the grading system. But I do think we need a major club in London, and if Gary can turn the Broncos into a major club, that would be tremendous. And good luck to him. I hope he manages to make it work. And if he does, so much credit to him.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. And you could tell in our discussion with him last week how passionate he was about getting London back into Super League. So it's good to see that he's going to be aggressive in his pursuit for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, mate. Well, because it's just a smaller episode today, we'll wrap things up shortly because we want to save some in the tank for Matthew Ellis on Thursday. Yes. I'm sure he'll have plenty to say on this topic as well, mate.
I'm sure he will, yeah.
Yeah, mate. We might wrap things up here unless there's anything else you want to touch on, Martyn, before Thursday.
I think that's everything for the time being. This was a shortened version of the podcast, and we'll call it there, and we'll come back on Thursday with Matthew Ellis, and I'm sure we'll have a great podcast then. Thanks,
Absolutely, mate. No worries, Martyn. We'll end it here. Cheers.